It's been 12 days since I switched to the i3 Tiling Window Manager. How am I doing? Let's discuss. So it has been 12 days since I've made the switch to the i3 Tiling Window Manager. How am I getting along with it? Getting along just fine, but I'm kind of a special case. I can get work done in anything. I can live on any Linux distribution out there. I can live in any window manager. I can get work done in anything. Even if you just gave me the shell to live in, I could get work done. Video work, graphic work, obviously the exception. But for most things, yeah, I can make anything work. So the first video I made on i3 day one, I was like, wow, this is really different. I was struggling with it because it's foreign. i3 is completely different than other tiling window managers I've used. So there was an adjustment period. But 12 days in, nearly 2 weeks have gone by. I kind of know how i3 works a little bit, so I've kind of adjusted to it. It's not such a alien environment anymore. One of the really neat features I've discovered with i3 is that it has what they call binding modes. What are binding modes? Well, here in the official i3 documentation, binding modes, you can have multiple sets of bindings by using different binding modes. Think about that. You can have multiple sets of key bindings by using different binding modes, meaning if I'm in binding mode 1, I can have a set of key bindings. If I'm in binding mode 2, I can use that same set of key bindings for different functions. Does that make sense? So if I have mod enter to open up a terminal in binding mode 1, if I switch to a second binding mode, I could have mod enter open up a file browser, So I can use the same key bindings for different applications depending on what mode I'm in, if that makes sense. So it's a really neat feature. Let me show you this in action. So I'm gonna go over to my desktop here. So I have the VIFM file manager on the left-hand side. I have HTOP running in the right-hand side. Let me open up one more program. Let me just open up a terminal. Here, I'll do it this way. All right, so if I wanted to resize these windows, the Manjaro i3 edition, which is what I started with, their config file by default already had a binding mode called Resize Mode in it. Mod R enters you into what they call Resize Mode. So I'm going to mod R on this window right here. Mod R. All right. And you see at the top, Resize. It's telling us that we are in Resize Mode. Now, normally, mod enter on the keyboard would get me a terminal. Doesn't work now. I could hit it all day long. None of my normal key bindings that launch my apps or close windows or do anything, they're not going to work. That's because we're in a completely different mode, Resize Mode, and there's only a handful of key bindings for Resize Mode that actually do anything. H on the keyboard, H, J, K, L, basically the Vim keys. So the window with focus, H, I believe, will shrink it. Yes. And L will enlarge it. If I wanted to J and K, of course, I could J for down and K for up. So that is Resize Mode, right? Now, to get out of Resize Mode, you just hit Escape. So that is, binding modes kind of in a nutshell. Another neat little binding mode I have too. Let me close all these windows. Mod 0 here in the i3 edition. There's another binding mode. Mod 0 gets you into this lock, exit, switch user, reboot, your session stuff. As a matter of fact, at the top, it even gives you the hints with the key bindings. L for lock, E for exit, U for switch user. Anyway, I'm not going to hit any of that. I don't want to kill i3, and get booted back to the login manager, so I'll escape to get out of that mode. One more mode that we should discuss is the gaps mode. So let me open up some windows again. I should have just left all these up before. So gaps, mod shift G here in this config as what is called a gaps mode. And then there's two sub modes within that mode. I can either choose O for outer gaps, I for inner gaps. So if I choose O first for outer gaps, then we go to a sub binding mode called the outer gaps binding mode. And it tells me at the top shift plus or shift minus. So shift plus, of course, makes the outer gaps bigger. Shift minus shrinks them. Now let me escape. Now let me do this again. Super shift G for gaps. This time I'm going to choose I for inner. Now I'm in the inner gaps mode. And the same key bindings work shift plus or shift minus, except instead of adjusting the outer gaps, they're going to adjust the inner gaps. So it's really neat. So you can have, basically the same set of key bindings, but they do different things depending on which mode you're in. Pretty neat feature. I actually hit Super Shift C to close these windows, but it's not going to do anything because I'm still in the inner gaps mode. Let me escape, and now all my key bindings should work. So let's take a look at the code here. So let me pull up Vim here. This is, of course, my i3 config. So I'm going to Shift G, capital G, to get to the end of the document because I know one of the modes, the binding modes I just discussed, is here toward the end of the document. And that is the gaps mode. You see this line here, line 381, bind sim mod plus Shift plus G to mode, and then the name of the mode gaps. And then you have this bit of code here, mode gaps. And then within that, you set two sub binding modes. Bind sim O for mode gaps outer. Bind sim I for mode gaps inner. So you set those two sub binding modes, and here's all the key bindings for the mode gaps inner and then mode gaps outer. It's actually the same key bindings for each mode. They just do different things. This one, of course, increases the inner gaps. This one increases the outer gaps, etc. So pretty self-explanatory. Again, all of this was in the default Manjaro i3 config, so I didn't really play with the mode gaps at all. The other binding modes they had already had set, Resize Mode was also here, but I did play with this one a little bit. So bind sim mod R to mode resize. They were using JKL semicolon to resize the windows. I switched that immediately to HJKL, like a sane person would do. I switched it to the Vim keys. I think I also played with the adjustments. They weren't using 4 pixels and 10 pixels for the adjustments. They were using something else, so I changed the size. The other mode that they had was mod 0. Got you the mode system, which is the session stuff, the lock, exit, switch, suspend, hibernate, reboot, shutdown, and here's all the key bindings for that mode that do those particular tasks. One quick thing I want to touch on. Now, binding modes, of course, are great. A couple of negatives, a couple of things that are still kind of bothering me a little bit with i3. This one I just discovered the other day. You guys know I have a lot of virtual machines. I do a lot of stuff in VirtualBox. VirtualBox has some strange issues. Sometimes I launch a VM and you see the initially that very small size that this VM started with, and this is a VM I have set to launch full screen. Look at this. What is this doing? And then I can try to resize it. Yeah, I think the VM crashed. I lost it. Let me try that again. Anyway, we'll give this a few seconds, but you will see it does some very strange things. Why is it trying to launch a VM with that screen resolution? And this is a VM Linux Mint 19 I've had for a while. It always launches full screen. The VirtualBox guest editions are working, or normally working, not in i3. It should be a 1920 by 1080 resolution. And by now I should have got to a login manager. I think I'm having a problem because it doesn't like the resolution this thing is trying to launch in. And then if I manually resize it, I may not even get anything. It looks like, Xorg, it's not even loading up. The login manager never loads up. So this is strange. And this is pretty much all my VMs. They all do this. So there is something buggy with VirtualBox and i3. I did a quick search for it online, a Google search. And it seems like I'm not the only one that has these issues with VirtualBox and i3. There's some strange stuff that goes on there. One other kind of small issue. The VirtualBox issue, that's kind of a big one. I use VirtualBox a lot. One other issue I've noticed is that when I first log into i3, the number lock is not set to on, and it's not a big deal, but VirtualBox, or excuse me, in i3, it actually respects your number lock. Like if the number lock is not on and you have key bindings set to like mod plus 1 on the keypad or mod plus 2 on the keypad, the number lock's not on, those key bindings don't work. Where in Qtile, and I'm pretty sure in Xmonad, it didn't matter whether I had the number lock on or not, you know, those key bindings would always work. So that's not a big deal, because the first couple of days I couldn't figure out what was going on. Sometimes my key bindings would work, sometimes they wouldn't. Now that I know that's a problem, I just, oh, okay, let me turn the number lock on. But anyway, so that's 12 days into, you know, switching to i3. All in all, I'm pretty happy. Probably gonna keep using i3. You know, I usually when I do one of these, I'm switching to something. You know, I'll do it for at least a month. So I'm definitely gonna stay on i3. You know, at least for the month of January. Long term, possibly. I don't know. We may go longer than that. We'll see. Before I go, this show was made possible by Ansem, Carlos, Chris, Dylan, Leor, Rob, and Tony. They are the producers of the show. Show's also brought to you by all those ladies and gentlemen. You see all those names on the screen. They are the supporters of this channel. They make this show possible. If you would like to support me, please do so. Support me over on Patreon. You will find me at DistroTube over on Patreon. Peace, guys.